Okay. Right, I'm Murray Nyman, G6JYB, and just to help clarify on the introduction and what I get up to, as the slide subtly says there, it's got RSGB and IARU Region 1. For RSGB today, because I do other things, I'm the Society's microwave spectrum manager. There's 3 spectrum managers and a spectrum directors to look after HF, VHF and microwave. Because microwave dominates the sheer number of bands and beacons, all beacon issues ultimately run through me for the UK as well. And then on to Ofcom, our regulator. At Region 1 level, I'm, along with Graham actually, one of the key coordinators for the VHF and Microwave Committee, and also have a role on what's called the External Relations Committee, the relatively low profile but ultimately the most important Region 1 body in this context. It is the body that has people on all the regulators' committees, and we'll talk about why that is important now. So before we do, we'll just have the quick summary of what frequency allocations there are. And I've used these arrows to indicate if the allocation is, Earth to space or space to Earth or both. Now, quite a few of them are both ways. We were talking first thing this morning, for those who were here, about things like 23 SEMS where it's uplinks only, and basically the reason for that is anything as a satellite up here that would be coming down would hit lots of primary user radars, basically, so that's likely to stay in that direction. 2.4 gigs is another quite important allocation, but unfortunately, as we've may be aware, the satellite allocations, not the rest of the amateur allocations, are only lying within the ISM band, the same band as the Wi-Fi, and therefore that's becoming quite a noisy band. Come back to that one in a moment. As we go up, there's plenty more bands. There's also allocations down HF. Most of the focus traditionally on satellite users has been in VHF and UHF. I'm not against that, but what you're doing by focusing too strongly on that is threatening to lose the other bands by not keeping them in use. And things like Oscar 40 has made significant attempts to, because it's a big enough satellite, to put some of those other bands in use, and we need, whether it's at CubeSat level or larger level, more examples like that. 3.4 gigs never been used. That's a significant resource that if we don't use it soon we'll lose altogether. 5.6 and 5.8 up and down, I've seen plans in the past by AMSAT-UK to use that. Huge amounts of bandwidth here, admittedly with a bit more Doppler, but we should be attempting to use some of these, and 10 gigs, which is quite handy for people with satellite dishes. So one of the other important messages here is within this collection of bands, only the 2 metre band is a primary band where amateurs can decide amongst themselves what happens. Give or take the odd fisherman or taxi driver in certain countries that doesn't respect the rules. Other than that, all these have to be shared with other people, and therefore we're secondary and have to collaborate. The other point here is that if you're coming down from space to Earth, generally speaking, amateurs don't have very directional beams, and therefore you have to have all the countries' agreements in that region, if not the world, to have a new band. Given nowadays, which hasn't been done so far, the availability of GPS in orbit, you should be able to be geolocationally aware, and therefore even if you can't get your antennas sorted out, if you're in relatively low Earth orbit, you should be able to take advantage of Region 2 or Region 3. So, as per my friends, if you were around for the 8:30 session, perhaps you want a new frequency band. Well, if you followed the logical sequence, and in many respects you don't have too much choice in this, it can take forever, and you either have to be very patient or very smart to try and shortcut this. So what we're talking about here is a new allocation at international level. We're not talking here about some tweak to the 2-metre band plan, okay? Where you have to start generally is a requirement with some good justification from usually a national satellite society, because they will be usually the people who know about these things. Because they're not represented in any body, which is one of the many weaknesses of the AMSAT organisations, the next step is for them to get their nationally recognised amateur radio society to adopt that, and they can then bring that to either the regional IARU executives or ultimately the what's called the AC, the Administrative Council, and it's the AC that writes what's called the spectrum requirement, and it is that spectrum requirements paper which Hans was showing earlier is effectively the agenda that is used for negotiating positions with international bodies. So these early steps are largely within your own control, I have to say. It's not often, with the exception of mainly Region 1 and AMSAT-UK, that we see too much promotion down this role. To some degree you can shortcut it a little bit via Hans, who represents AMSAT at the global level, but if he can't show good justification or demand from the grassroots, you fail at step one. After that, your next challenge is IARU is only got observer status at any of these international meetings on the regulation front. So you then have to get at least one and quite a few national regulators to agree with you. And increasingly nowadays, whilst it's the nations that attend this stuff we'll talk about at ITU level, they'll coordinate amongst themselves regionally. So CPT is the regional coordinating body for European regulators, for example, and a bit wider. Asia Pacific Telecoms, CITEL for American states, and there's several others, Russia, Arab Group, what have you. In SEPT, Region 1, which has quite a large operation, knows its position, is got itself on the odd committee. In quite a few of these bodies, we're nothing like as well established, and their proceedings aren't anything like as transparent either. SEPT, every SEPT meeting is published on the web. You can see what's going on to some degree. Basically, they will study what has been set as agenda items for the next World Radio Conference. WRC is a World Radio Conference. The one we're working on 2012 has already had its agenda decided, apart from one important thing, and that's the agenda for what will be the conference after it. So Walk 2012, for example, will decide what the Walk 2016 agenda will be. So if you can't bring proposals out the blue here, it's got to go through, sadly, a bit of a long-winded and bureaucratic process to get yourself in here. And generally, IARU has generally been successful in getting one amateur agenda item at each World Radio Conference. The last one basically was the 136 kilohertz LF band, a bit low for satellites admittedly. The one before that, which was had a lot of blood on the carpet, was the 7 megahertz, 7.1 to 7.2 decision. So there's one thing having a long wish list, but you have to remember that in terms of international priorities, we're lucky to get one in any given 4-year cycle at this point, assuming you're working this way round. If they do then agree it, then it becomes effectively a UN-endorsed treaty, and then the goal of any national society or AMSAT society is to ensure their government actually implements that and lets you use it. Then we can amend the band plan for it, and sadly, if after all that effort we don't go and use it, then several cycles later, demand for it may pop up, and hey presto, we're under threat at the next agenda item, like for the mobile phone community, for example. So that sounds long-winded. There are a couple of ways to shortcut this, or to be smart and at making sure that whatever your policy is here is fed in and activated before these things at the national level. So basically the trick is to work on a bottoms-up approach, because otherwise you'll never get the top-down process to work. Just locally, we're coming to a very interesting convergence point. Mainly the European societies, but technically it was open to all the region, did meet for a 2-day weekend planning and papers session in February in a very cold Vienna, and that at the time was already starting to look at stuff we'd set in motion 2 years before in 2008 as far as spectrum strategy is concerned. The amateurs have a sort of 3-year conference cycle, so in any given year it's one particular region will hold its main conference, and that cycle is coming to Sun City in South Africa in August 2011. The interesting thing about that is it's the last major conference, amateur-wise, ahead of WRC 12, and therefore that really is the venue at trying to influence what the final request will be as far as the IIRU's top priority at forcing a WRC agenda item for what will probably be Walk 16. At Walk 12, the amateur item is the 500 kilohertz band. Again, not of top interest to satellite community perhaps, other than the fact that the AIS and maritime location people have other interests in that band, and their agenda item also covers their VHF allocations as well. So as we were hearing yesterday, CubeSats looking at AIS, for example, and in fact I've seen some work by Norway because of the fight over the Arctic and what have you is very significant there. So the point about this is the timeline for getting policies in place kicked off a few weeks ago from our point of view. Our RSGB has become quite active in, certainly at Vienna. I think we were responsible for nearly half of all inputs. Now that's not stopping any other Region 1 nation writing a paper, or other regions putting in information papers if they wanted us to take note. I'm just saying that we're prepared to, and have been for the past few years, lay our cards on the table. And it's not always about asking for more, or arguing over what the latest contest rules are, which is the other half of the debates usually at these things. The agenda is moving, and it's going to be moving about to what bands do we most focus on and are prepared to potentially trade in exchange for more suitable bands to basically cope with this spectrum pressure and interference pressures we're getting from commercial people. RSGB has never actually had a spectrum policy as such. It's been evolved out of this process. So, but this time round, because of what's at stake going forward after the 500k thing, that's something we're going to be putting together ourselves. Inputs from UK amateurs are welcome, and they'll be heard later in the year. But basically, the provisional views are, if you look back, and I'm not going to go into them today because it's a bit detailed, you will find it in papers going back to the 2007 Vienna meeting and the 2008 main conference that we held at Dubrovnik Sabtat. So we're looking to set what the topics are and drafting. Some of the ideas will go on either public display or discussion either in October when RSGB has its national convention, where there'll be a beacon in the VHF stream. I can announce that there will be a new beacons and band plans talk replacing one of the other slots there, where we've lost a speaker. And there's also a spectrum forum Well, in the UK, it's possibly slightly unique. All the national societies, whether it's AMSAT, microwaves, HF operators, most of them have their national society, or national interest group, shall we say, and they interact with RSGB via the Spectrum Forum. So that's how we manage to collate in and keep people in sync, especially if we're talking about some quite important policy decisions. Given that process, we then expect, ideally in January, to start approving the final papers, because the deadline to get into South Africa is April, ahead of the conference in August. Just to dispel the odd rumour, it's not dodgy people in smoke-filled rooms. There's no smoke nowadays. There's still some dodgy people. You can see, actually, Graham's laptop with one less sticker here from a few years ago, the same one we're using here. That's me looking extremely excited, and Graham probably very concerned that the last paper on satellites, which was to pick a slot up in 2 metres, proved just one controversial step too far at the time, but nonetheless, a lot of other spectrum strategy stuff was endorsed unanimously by this group. And no, although it tends, this meeting was at Dubrovnik, so it, although it was dominated by European people just by sheer travel arrangements, you do get proxies. And of course, when we're in Africa next year, it'll be interesting to see the relative composition of attendees there. The Graham, up till recently, David and myself were part of the sort of inner team that support the VHF chairman, Michael Kaslik, OE1MCU. He has the position on the Region 1 executive. So whilst we were talking this morning about stuff that effectively goes in via hands, via the satellite route, a lot of the more detailed work or top-level requirements come in effectively back through here. And this is where, if each of the AMSAT societies had basically nobbled their national society reps here, we'd see things probably move quite quickly, as opposed to us just trying to lead the pack. Be nice to have a slightly more, bit more momentum and collaboration. So, try and speed up. Going back to the process we had a few slides ago, we'll take one example of where we did get a thing through the World Radio Conference, and that was to make 7.1 to 7.2 primary as of March 2009, although there's still a few countries that didn't agree with that. But you'll notice that whilst the original segment, because it was becoming primary, in theory no other users, no one else would have been bothered about whether it was satellites as well as terrestrial people. IARU basically never asked for an amateur satellite allocation there, and that's, you could say, was potentially an opportunity missed. What you have to realise, though, is one of these little footnote things here has basically got all the Arab countries still with broadcast stations in the band, and until, and with those there, it was lucky that we got even that through. And of course, they certainly wouldn't want to contemplate some HF satellite interfering with their radio reception out there. But nonetheless, there's a principle potentially here about if we can achieve, a harmonised allocation all around the world, it should include the amateur satellite community as well as the terrestrial community. What has been new, I did actually have what's new. There are a few little developments. One we'll talk about in a moment is the fact that 50 megs has shot up the agenda, both at terrestrial as well as satellite level. The other thing is the renewed emphasis on ensuring not just coordination, but ITU filings and the IRU website, and in fact there's another document that Graham's drafted and will no doubt endorse at South Africa, is what's called the VHF Handbook chapter. In Region 1, I think it's unique, there is actually they're called handbooks or manuals for HF and VHF and microwave management. You don't tend to see it in the other two regions. They just issue a band plan, and it's a bit more amorphous after that. But this provides a very good framework for and reference point, which then goes out to these things. But the importance of capturing or coordinating with particularly the CubeSat builders at ensuring they're brought within the fold is all important there. Otherwise, if we fall in disrepute with the ITU, all amateur satellites will be shut down, and that was the fundamental threat we faced and still potentially do. Mentioned earlier that the time's been coming that what's being talked about in relatively quiet places or in the odd national paper starts to become an international one for amateurs, and that is how do we defend or consolidate spectrum here. The other thing that will no doubt feature in the South African conference is what's called band plan reform and simplification. And band plan simplification is where we root and branch search out old modes and old allocations within the amateur band plans and cast them out. Or spot where, for example, overcrowding or demand has shot up and replan. So one of our current targets is actually terrestrial, not just satellite developments down in 6 meters. Another one is promoting the take-up of 4 meters in Europe. There's been quite a campaign there. And the other one, which I'll mention a bit more of, is 3.4 gigs, one of our primary escape bands, potentially for substituting compared to the 2 gig S-band allocation. We have done quite a bit of planning in 23 SEMS for not just the Galileo mitigation, but to be able to get licenses full stop when the radar community say this is a safety of life band, go away. That's a snapshot of the page that Hans was talking about earlier. If you go onto the satellite section of the IRU website, the links here have got quite a few new documents or updated documents, including the Swiss Cube examples. So for any satellite builder, please read, digest and follow, I think is the message there. And from there is links to pages that Graham and the others manage on the actual frequency coordination list as well, I should mention. Right, coming to 50 megs. The quote there hasn't actually changed in years. The only thing is that there's an emphasis that when we look at 6 meters, which in some parts of the world is 50 to 54 megahertz, fundamentally based on what CPT will agree with or has already allocated really, we're only going to be talking in future about concentrating on the first 2 megahertz of that. And because even that is got a few primary users still lurking in there, we don't expect to get all 2 megs exclusively. We certainly want more than 500 kilohertz. We really target ideally 1 megahertz as primary, the rest is secondary is the probable solution. And that's the situation we have in the UK, to be honest. The new sentence, which as every year or so, the AC does consider revisions or comments on their top-level strategy, and I was asked by Region 1's chairman to take a quick look at this because he knew that we had an interest in it, and I thought, well, we'd better not ask for too much, but from already inputs we'd had, it was pretty damned obvious that if 6 meters was to become one of the next IRU targets, we'd better get the satellite people explicitly in the list. So yes, this is the justification sentence for why we want 1 new band in the middle there, and it's basically a frequency bridge. It's the last VHF bridge. It's also, as where you'll see in a moment, there's probably not much commercial opposition with a bit of luck. That doesn't mean that you get 500 kilohertz in the band plan, it's like 2 meters. The satellite community theoretically has got 2 megahertz in the 2 meter band plan, but you have to share it with all the other amateurs. So that's done afterwards. So that change occurred actually in October 2009, but wasn't published till a bit later. And as I say, whether it's this or even down at HF level, a lot of the modernisation initiatives are coming from our region. Few comments. Obviously, it's a little bit of an antenna challenge, but you can still get a tape measure antenna to deploy usefully there. European law basically has digital switchover for the TV broadcasters by the end of 2012 and bans them from VHF band 1. That's a given. It's not quite the same in one or two other parts of the world, but fundamentally that will set a trend elsewhere. And so there's definitely potential for us to complete what are basically grassroots national allocations in 6 metres to sort this out. It's also got lower Doppler and also has the potential for flying stuff in it now. Yes, okay. And that's just an extract from the international table. So whilst you might think you've got 6 metres in your licence in this country, theoretically it was broadcasting, and it is that anomaly that by the end of 2012 we hope to start correcting. At 3.4 gigs we've been busily working away, encouraging countries again from the grassroots level to get this vital allocation at 10 megs. The latest two are there. Technically it's not officially amateur satellite service over here, but it is in the other two parts of the world, and that's why it was a little bit of a shame to lose the Eagle initiative, which would have brought this allocation into use, and I am looking to encourage some initiative there. The other thing we're doing in the UK, they'll hear more about this at the convention, is the transformation of 23 SEMs from a very difficult band to something that's a showcase, because it's the first band that's got enough bandwidth for digital TV and data. So in summary, the future can be bright despite the commercial pressures if we all work together, and I think that's the important thing there. The other thing is it's important that the AMSATs, whether it's the physical ones or the societies, somehow bring all the allocations into use. If you want to score a few world records or do atmospheric limb sounding, there's plenty of allocations that have never had an amateur satellite on them, and how we continue to justify having those allocations is becoming difficult. The other thing is most people have talked about links with schools and education. Occasionally I hear stuff about emergency comms, slightly arguable. What I very rarely hear of is flying the right experiment for environmental monitoring or propagation research, space weather. We need to adopt green goals as well as STEM goals. The PLT community now promote themselves that they're a green technology because they support smart grids. That is a deadly but very effective tool. We've got to be with all these other people as well. So basically, please work up, and also, as I say, capture the university groups where there's lots of good innovation in, so we can all work together, and it's obviously up to you. And at that point, there you go.
Thank you very much, Mike. Just got a couple of minutes for any questions.
I saw a hand at the back.
Ken, did you have a question, Ken? No.
No.
No questions. Okay. Murray, thank you very much indeed. You have a question. Come on then.
Yes, okay, Murray. I've got two questions on the internet here. One from Victor Uniform 3 Tango Yankee. What are your thoughts on various CubeSat projects by educational and institutions using the amateur radio frequencies? And does the IARU provide any guidance when the application is submitted for frequency allocation? Perhaps not your answers from that, but that's the first question.
And quickly, what was the second? Well, to save time.
Yeah, he's basically asking, does the IRAU provide any guidance when application is submitted for frequency allocation, and that's involving educational institutions using amateur radio frequencies?
Yeah, two very similar questions, and as I say, if you look back in that slide pack, the top level IRU website has got the links that Hansa and Graham and others manage, which provide the guidance on filings, frequencies, and the contact information, and they will very, very gladly help try and coordinate people and guide them to other groups that have already gone through the process and therefore have had the experience. The thing about CubeSats is, provided we do bring them into the amateur fold, and there's usually a lot of good opportunities for doing that, it is, it comes back to the use or lose principle. So they basically can't launch, or would be illegal if they don't coordinate and get filed, is the fundamental thing, whether it's amateur or otherwise. And we're one of the best bodies with the experience for helping them do that. So it's an opportunity for us, but it's a great opportunity to keep at least some of those frequencies in use. It's tricky with CubeSat technology on some bands, I realise.
Just as a sort of mental knowledge, there used to be an AIRU definition of an amateur radio satellite, and I don't know whether it's still current, I don't know whether that's your answer of it, and it said things like it must be open, it must be... No, is that still valid or not? It's still valid. Yeah. And it's amongst those papers that have been tested.
Yes, there is no such thing as a university satellite service. It either has to fit within the astronomy service, the science research service, or the amateur service, or some military object, obviously. So, right.
Yeah, another internet from Mike Zero, Italy, Echo, Oscar. And it's really to do with manufacturing of equipment for satellite use and foundation license holders. They're not allowed to build equipment. Should they be lobbying manufacturers for satellite users?
They are actually allowed to not only use any certified black box, but any qualified kit, and after a reform some years ago, to be able to use amateur satellites. So I don't see that as an obstruction. I know it's a UK-specific question. We've never found that to be an obstruction. The main challenge is for the special interest groups, whether it's AMSAT or micros or other people, to capture that population, develop material for them, because it's barely covered in their foundation exam.
And finally, this compliments on your talk from Clive, G1EUC, and he says you've molded everyone to attend your talk on Tuesday.
Yes, I've got 2 more talks coming up, one on Tuesday on the future of digital radio and TV, which is what Clive's talking about, and in October, as I say, those in the UK are welcome to attend this session where things like 6 meters and a few other bands are in play as well.
All right, okay, that's great. Thanks very much indeed.